Good morning everyone and welcome to our 61st AGM of Hampshire Wildlife Trust. It's absolutely brilliant, isn't it, to be together face to face. The last two AGMs we've done from home, from our bedrooms on Zoom, so it's absolutely brilliant to see everybody face to face and catch up after what feels like a very long time. So thanks for braving the weather and coming out today, really great to see everybody. It's really great to see familiar old faces and lots of new faces and some very new faces. I think we have our youngest member ever in the room with us today. It's absolutely lovely to see old and new faces today. And I will now hand over to our President John Coleman to start the formal proceedings of the AGM.
The National Trust is holding its AGM today, and I'd just like to read what it says in their papers. The event starts at 10 a.m, coincidence, and we hope to finish by 5 p.m. Now, I can assure you that we are going to finish this AGM long before that. On to the main part of the AGM, and that is the report of the last year. So can I hand to David Jordan, the chairman, who will give his report.
The headline is, it was another very successful year, albeit with some significant stresses and strains. I'm able to say that in my opinion, and of course that of the auditors, that we are financially sound, and you'll hear much more from Richard in a moment or two. I'm also very impressed with the sound financial management brought about by the staff, and this gives me the opportunity to express my thanks both to Natasha as our Director of Finance, amongst other things, and Debbie and the rest of her team for such a successful year. I'm also able to report, of course, formally that we are a going concern. That's a technical term, of course, which you're familiar with out of charity law. Not everything was easy, of course, and that applies, I think, probably to everybody in this room, as well as to our trust and our partners and supporters. It's been a very tough year. COVID, of course, threw its curved ball at us again, and we saw a number of instances again of poor behaviour on our sites, which is deeply regrettable. We've had real challenges with recruitment and many other things too, but it has nonetheless been a very successful year, so I'm very pleased to be able to report that. I'm going briefly to talk about our strategy. Debbie will talk more about that in the session after the break, and I'll just draw out a handful of highlights from last year, and then I'll close and hand over to Richard. So our strategy, Wilder, which is only 3 years old, but we refreshed it last year to realign with the national strategy, which actually reflected ours very closely indeed. And it has these three principal components. Nature and recovery, we call it 30 by 30. In essence, that means what we want to see is 30% of land and 30% of sea set aside in some form or other for nature, so that nature is in recovery by 2030. So 30 by 30. People taking action for nature. We want at least 1 in 4 people to be taking action for nature, which we believe will have a significant impact, even a tipping point, which could be fundamental in bringing about a recovery of nature. And nature is a solution. Nature-based solutions, you're all familiar with the term. So the sorts of things that we'll be looking at and are looking at. How can nature help with pollution? How can nature help with flood risk reduction? How can nature help with climate change mitigation and or adaptation? Again, Debbie will touch on these things in a bit more detail after the break. Just a few highlights for me. A month ago, I was on the island and I visited the 2 farms that we've very recently acquired, in total about 500 acres. Fabulous, both of them fabulous. And although we've only just started to rewild them, nature is bouncing back in a fabulous style. It's absolutely beautiful. And an astonishing statistic is that we've actually doubled our estate on the Isle of Wight since 2020. And we're motoring. It isn't going to stop there, and you'll hear about some other plans that we have too, again, after the break. Crayfish, white-tailed, white-clawed, thank you. I have actually collected thousands over the years, but I remember speaking to somebody in the 90s who was a crayfish expert. He had applied for a job, and he reckoned that the white-clawed crayfish had 15 years to live in the UK. I'm very happy to say that we've discovered yet another population at our reserve in Winnell. Some of you may have seen Autumn Watch last week, reintroducing crayfish, I think on the Candover that was. So there's a lot of good news around. Perhaps I should say that the guy who applied for the job didn't get it. Pine martins have been demonstrated now to be in the New Forest. I think there was a question at the annual at our AGM a couple of years ago about pine martins. They are starting to reappear all over the place, and we're part of a much wider series of studies to look at the genetics, the health of these populations, with a view to doing perhaps a lot more. But I think it's lovely to see some of these wonderful species coming back. We're doing a great deal in the marine environment, often unseen, really super stuff around seagrass, for example, lots of important thinking about sequestration of carbon, blue carbon as it's known, and the biodiversity associated with those seagrass fields. Many other things too, in partnership with others, very important people. Nitrate reduction, again, Debbie will touch on this after the break, but this is why we've been acquiring some land so that we can take nitrate out of the inputs onto those land, sell some of those as credits, but also keep some back so we're actually reducing nitrates, and that's a nature-based solution. We had our 60th anniversary last year. We had a fundraising campaign. We did raise over and above our target, and that is fantastic. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank those of you here who may have contributed to that appeal. And a huge amount more. We've got a wonderful impacts report. We've got a wonderful annual report. I hope you all have the opportunity to read it and help us to celebrate. So I would like to finish by expressing my thanks. This is an absolutely crucial time for the environment and nature. It's never been more important. And all of you in this room, I'd like to thank, all of our members, all of our supporters, our volunteers, our partners, our donors. Because without you and them, we simply couldn't survive and do the great stuff. And finally, just to reiterate my thanks to Debbie and her team and her staff. Thank you.
Well, you may recall that I was amazed and very pleased last year that we'd made an unrestricted fund surplus in a year of COVID and lockdown of £228,000. Well, 21-22 was also affected by COVID, and yet we have a larger surplus, £751,000. This is again a very good outturn, but more about this later. Once again, this is due to the generosity of our members and supporters, and a lot of very hard work, but also robust financial management and the diversity of our income. So let us look at our income. Our income totalled £7.5 million, up 11% over the previous year, being £5.2 million of unrestricted and £2.3 million of restricted income. So the unrestricted income. This can be used as the trustees decide to support our charitable objects, and includes the following. Membership income, up nearly 7% at £1.3 million. That's fantastic. Legacy income, £332,000. It's lovely to receive these unexpected and of course unbudgeted funds that make such a difference. Donations, £434,000, always most gratefully received. And you heard earlier the nitrate reduction programme, net income after costs of £1 million. As you heard from David, this is where we bought land to rewild and consequently have nitrate credits to sell. And Arcadian Ecology, our trading arm, a profit of just under £100,000. That's great. So moving on to restricted funds. Well, this is restricted income, which comes with restrictions from the donor as to how the money can be spent, increased to £2.29 million from £1.66 million in the previous year, partly due to the number of new projects, but also due to some projects being on hold in the previous year and coming forward to this year. So, what about expenditure? This was up 15% at £5.62 million, mainly due to increased activity, only partly due to inflation. Inflation really hits in the current year. I'll come on to that later. Conservation, education and engagement, which represents 82% of our costs, was up 14%. Membership expenditure increased due to recruitment activity gaining momentum, again after the pandemic and lockdowns, and reflected an increase in 4.3% in membership numbers. That's great. And included in the expenditure are the related support costs, which include our annual contribution to wildlife trusts at national level for their policy, advocacy and coordination work on behalf of all the individual wildlife trusts. Now this is a graph I rather like. Do you like this graph? You see, the green line is our income line, and it's going up over the 5 years. Our expenditure line is going up, but the gap's widening. That's fantastic, isn't it? So a bigger surplus. However, I'll be very surprised if the gap does not narrow substantially over the current year, due largely to huge inflationary pressures. It may even be that the lines cross, meaning we have a deficit. So watch this space. Well, I mentioned at the start that I'll be revisiting the unrestricted surplus for the year of £750,000, which is before legacies and investment gains. You may recall this included a net gain of £1 million in connection with the nitrate reduction programme. Yeah, that's some of the land. For better clarity, I should point out this is quite important, particularly for the current year when we get to it. Fortunately, £1 million is a round sum. That's good, because about 45% of that needs to be set aside for maintaining the land for the future. That's got to be set aside in a designated reserve. So that's a big sum, £450,000. And another sum about similar, about £450,000, needs to go to repay the loan to buy the land. So you see, £900,000 is already spoken for. And effectively that reduces that 751,000 to a deficit of 149,000. Well, that's not so bad, because fortunately, of course, we've got the legacies and the investment gains of nearly £450,000 to cover that. But it's important you understand that, because in the current year there'll be more activity. There'll be higher nitrate reduction activity and actually a much tougher financial environment too. So moving on to investments. We had about £1.2 million for investments at the start of the year, and we made an unrealised gain of about 9%, £111,000, which is good. But unless the markets pick up substantially over the rest of the year, it'll be no surprise if we make something of a loss in the current year. We do have and will have money to invest. Largely as a result, as I mentioned, this £450,000 we're putting in designated reserves for maintaining the land. And then, of course, there'll be a bigger sum in the current year. So it's quite a lot of money we have to invest. So really vitally important that these funds are invested wisely and with good investment advice. Well, our investments are managed by CCLA through their Charities Ethical Fund, and this has performed well over the last 3 years. CCLA screens systematically on a wide range of areas, including biodiversity and climate change, and are actively working with companies on ethical issues. The fund does not invest in companies producing or refining oil and gas. CCLA continues to restrict investment in companies with a high carbon footprint, which do not comply with the Paris Agreement. So, that's good. So just moving on to, I'm going to finish with a financial summary, and I'm going to read, because it's important, I'm going to read through it. Apologies. The annual report and accounts are prepared in accordance with the accounting rules for a charitable company, the Charities SORP. Audited by ASEX, clean audit report. Thank you, assets. Total year-end assets amounted to £15.3 million, of which £13.4 million was land and buildings. A surplus for the year of £1.96 million, just under £2 million. 1.2 million of that unrestricted and 0.76 million of restricted. The £1.2 million of unrestricted fund surplus that I mentioned, of course, includes the £450,000 of legacies and unrealised gains that I mentioned earlier. So, funds breakdown. This is what we had at the end of the year: 10.7 million in general funds and 4.6 million in restricted funds. That all looks pretty good, doesn't it? But, another but. Challenging times ahead. High inflation, high energy costs, high interest rates, and a consequent squeeze on income and profits. It's not going to be easy. We will continue to maintain strong budgetary controls and look for new and diversified sources of income. We are more grateful than ever to our loyal members and supporters, that's you, who enable us to continue the work to meet our charitable objects. Thank you.
Right, on to other matters then. The appointment of a president to replace me. So, provision for my successor. This position is elected by you, the members, and the president has one constitutional role, that of presiding over the annual general meeting. So, as the retiring president, I'm delighted to recommend to you and to propose Megan McCubbin as my successor. So, in the papers, there is a brief summary biography of her. Unfortunately, she cannot be here today, so she is disappointed that she wasn't able to be here. But there will be a short video message at the end of this AGM, so you will hear from her. Vice President's got no constitutional role, but acts as a supporter and champion of the Trust work. And we are delighted that local resident Chris Packham has offered to serve as a Vice President. He's been a member for more than 20 years of this Trust, and he's a big supporter of our work. Again, there is a biography of Chris in your papers, and again, there will be a little video from him at the end. I'd just like to say a few personal words. In the mid-1980s, I and my family went to live in New Zealand for 3 years. And when we came to leave, a friend said, "Oh, aren't you lucky? You've been here in the 3 years that the country has changed more than in the previous 20. And he was right, yes. The country had grown up. It had grown up from thinking of itself as an ex-British colony to being a strong, independent nation. And yes, I was lucky to actually see that. So, on coming back here, I joined this Wildlife Trust, and I became more actively involved in 2005 when I became a trustee, and then the interesting times really started between 2010 and 2016 when I was chairman. And they were interesting times. But now, looking back over the whole 30 odd years of my membership, I think I can say that this trust has changed more in the past 3 years than in any of the rest of those 30 years. And it isn't just COVID. Obviously, COVID made the trust change the way it did things, but it's more than that. And I think, like New Zealand, I think this wildlife trust has grown up. It has become very assured and confident in what it's doing. It's happy with its mission, and it knows how to execute that mission. And we all know that the environment is in deep trouble. Heaven knows how deep that trouble would be if the trust didn't exist. So there is vast work and responsibility on the trust in the years ahead. And so I believe that with the added professionalism and competence and dedication which is shown by the staff, so ably led by Debbie and her senior management team, and with the dedication that the board put into their responsibilities as trustees and directors. Interestingly, there is still a major place for you, the membership. You all go to make the trust what it is. And it's interesting that this trust has been one of it is perhaps the trust that other members of the Wildlife Trust movement in the UK follow. This trust is a pace setter, and it all comes, I think, from being grown up. You just need to read the annual report, really read the annual report, to see what we are now doing. So I'm very happy as what you might call a sort of insider to pass the baton of presidency to someone who is, let's say, a celebrity member. I think my sort of job as president has moved on to be the sort of president that Megan will be. So, as part of my handover, I'd just like to let you hear 2 brief video clips. First, there is one from the new Vice President, Chris Packham, and then there will be one from his stepdaughter, Megan McCubbin.
Hello, Chris Packham here. Just wanted to say what a pleasure it is to be invited to be Vice President of the Hampshire Wildlife Trust. I was born in Hampshire, I still live in Hampshire. Hampshire is where my heart is. It's my favourite place on the planet, and I'm very keen, of course, that we do everything we can together to make sure that it's a healthy and happy place for wildlife and the environment. And I look forward to supporting Megan McCubbin as President. She's my stepdaughter, and we're very keen to work together whenever possible to boost the image and progress that the Trust wants to make. So thank you very much. We're looking forward to getting started at any stage in the near future. Now's the time we all have to stand up and make a difference, and we aim to do our part with you.
Hi everyone, I'm so sorry that I can't be there with you in person today for this really important AGM. I really tried everything to get down there, but I'm up in northern Scotland and I'm doing a bit of work and I couldn't make the trip unfortunately, and I'm really gutted about it because I would love to have been there to meet you all face to face, to say hello and get to know you all. I had to send this video message because I really just have to say thank you so much for the invitation to be the new president of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. I understand I'm stepping into some big shoes and I'm going to do my utmost in this role as we continue on to fight for biodiversity and the climate. Southampton's a really important area to me. It's where I grew up, watching everything from the badgers to the butterflies. I spent a lot of time in the New Forest, of course, watching the deer, and the Isle of Wight as well, of course, is very special. There's red squirrels over there and hopefully very soon some beavers as well. And I spent a lot of my teenage years growing up on the island, so it's really where my heart is, it's where my home is. So I'm genuinely so flattered and honoured to have been asked. I never thought in a million years that I'd have this position, so I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. As a science communicator, it's really important to me that I engage as many people as I can in wildlife, get them to get excited about things, everything from, I don't know, earthworm reproduction to the bigger problems like climate and overconsumption. I hope together we can really drive home that message about how important our environment is for all generations to get on board with community conservation projects, biodiversity loss and so on and so forth. So I really look forward to the future and I can't thank you enough. I'm delighted to be your new president.
On behalf of the Board of Trustees, probably on behalf of everybody in this room and also prompted by yourself, I would just like very briefly to reflect on John's role. Obviously I was John's successor as chairman and he handed over to me a superb Board of Trustees that he'd recruited, and I'm absolutely delighted to have been able to work with them and equally delighted that a significant number of those trustees are still with us. As trustees, as it were. So, I mean, really that's it. John very kindly stepped into the president role, as you know, and continued to attend council and offer literally his wise counsel. You've just heard some of the wisdom that he's brought to bear, and I will undoubtedly miss him, but I will still phone him up for advice. And he's been absolutely brilliant, and he's really supported me in my role as chair. So perhaps again, you could join me in expressing our appreciation for the huge role that John has played over a significant number of years. John, thank you. So that's the end of our AGM. We have essentially an annual meeting after the break. So please do rejoin us for that.